Hello and welcome to the Hoop Collective podcast. We talk about the NBA, which we're doing on Thursday afternoon. Joining us from Anaheim, California, where he's investigating Shohei Ohtani. Just kidding. It's Tim Bontemps.
I'd like Shohei to give me a loan.
Interest free. You don't have to tell him about it. You can just take it right out of his account.
That's right.
It's a great deal.
That's right.
According to the feds, of course.
Being a good company man today in Anaheim, California.
Not a boy. Joining us from Dallas, Texas, it's Ben MacMahon.
Howdy, partners. Thought you might save me for the cleanup spot, but go ahead. We got a special guest here.
Nope, you're batting third. You're batting third. Joining us is our special guest from Seattle, Washington, the Machine, to join us for our annual large sample size theater. He joined us, I believe, it was maybe late November, early December for small sample size theater. Is the Machine, Kevin Pelton. Hello, Pelton.
Large sample size. We got a large panel today here.
I know. Bontemps has got to keep his mouth quiet, not so much talk. Listen.
Listen, I have to educate people, but with the Machine on here, I can just sit back and I can let the Machine do all the educating. So life is good for me.
Hey, you're in Anaheim. Go get some Mickey ears. You need big ears, small mouth.
I know that there's some
$79.99.
Oh, trust me. When I walked in the park today, the prices were eye-popping.
Okay, so Pelton, when you joined us to talk about this early in the season, we talked about a few things that were going on, and I thought we could revisit it. Way back when, I believe the Orlando Magic were in second place, and we were saying, is it possible that the Orlando Magic could actually be this good? And here we are now in the last week of the season, the last days of the season. The Magic currently hold the 5 seed, had a loss to the Bucks on Wednesday night. You have a large sample size with the Magic. They're going to be one of the wild cards in the mess that's the Eastern Conference playoff seedings. My head is hurting. I can't keep track of it. I kind of just wish I'll get to Sunday night and figure out who's where. But the Magic could theoretically be as high as 2 and as low as 6, maybe even 7. But now that you have a big sample size on the Magic, what do you think about them and their chances in this postseason?
I think they might be now ruled out at 2, but we can leave it to Bontemps. He's been dealing with all the tiebreakers in the Eastern Conference, so that I have not had to worry about them either. But yeah, I mean, I re-listened to part of the pod to remind me what we talked about, and the takeaway I had on the Magic back then was nothing that they were doing at the start of the season looked fluky, and that's still the case. Like, obviously, they wouldn't have been in the mix to finish second in the East if not for Philadelphia's injuries and Milwaukee kind of continuing to underperform, and the losses that they've had in the past week that have left the door open until, without Giannis, they had that impressive performance last night as we record this against Orlando. But one of the interesting things that struck me about the Magic is they've made this jump, and it's basically the entire same group as last year. Their leader in minutes played among newcomers is Anthony Black, their lottery pick at 8th. Joe Ingles is 9th. Over 85% of their minutes have been played by guys who were on the roster last year. And if you look at that group since the year 2000 was the period I looked at, 2 of the top 4 biggest increases season to season in terms of winning percentage have come this season from high continuity teams. One of them being the Magic, and they're actually being outdone by both in terms of continuity and in terms of improvement by the Minnesota Timberwolves. Now, Minnesota was a little more predictable with Karl Anthony Towns' injury and his return to the lineup and the development of Anthony Edwards. They were number 1 in my final Western Conference projections, although with a much lower number than they're actually going to get to. Orlando is quite surprising, especially in the context of the 2 ahead of them historically, one of whom was the Magic team the first year that Steve Clifford got there and replaced Frank Vogel. Both of those teams made coaching changes. So Minnesota and Orlando, and in particular Orlando with the Towns injury, are doing this with basically the exact same group as last year. And it's just kind of the internal development of their young talent that has carried them, quite possibly to a top 6 spot in the Eastern Conference.
Well, and if you look, just to set everything up for everybody from a seeding standpoint, they can't get to second anymore after the very bad back-to-back losses to Houston on Tuesday and Milwaukee on Wednesday. They have a massive game tonight meaning when the pod comes out Friday night in Philadelphia against the Sixers. Sixers who've won 6 in a row now have a couple paths to get out of the play-in, which would be massive for them next week. So Orlando could get up potentially as high as 3rd if they can win Friday night and then Sunday against Milwaukee. They could finish as low as 8th. So it is a wild swing, and they've had some bad luck. They obviously, coming into this week, having Franz Wagner sprain his ankle in Chicago or against Chicago the other day, losing him the past couple of games, that has been huge for them. And yeah, for a young team, it's funny. You look at the way their whole year has gone. We've talked a lot about Cleveland's struggles, obviously. We've talked about, Kevin just mentioned Milwaukee's struggles and Philly's injuries. If Orlando was 5th and could maybe be 8th and had been sort of in the back half of the East playoff picture the whole time, we'd be sitting here saying, man, this is a heck of a season for Orlando, and it still is. But if they end up losing 3 of their last 4 or their last 4 in a row, and they end up 8th and in the play-in going to Miami or somewhere else, it's gonna kind of completely change the way people think about their season, when really they've had a really impressive year. Paolo Banchero's taken a big step forward. And even with some injuries and with Wagner not shooting the way you would like, there's still a lot to be excited about with the Magic going forward. And then on the other hand, we could be talking about them in the 8-9 game a week from today. So it's just crazy how fast things have shifted around for them.
Yeah, they've proven to be a very good team. They're kind of old school. They play slow. They're defensive first. They don't shoot the ball great, don't score a lot, but they, I think, are 4th in the league in steals. And they are one of the top 5 or 6 rebounding teams in the league. In talking to some coaches, I started having some conversations in the last couple of days about the all defensive team. I always survey head coaches and assistant coaches for that. Jalen Suggs has come up several times as a guy who should be on the team, on the all defensive team. He's obviously certainly made a big leap on the defensive end this year. Paolo Banchero has had really good numbers. By the way, in my discussions with coaches for the all defensive team, the same, 10 to 15 names come up. The one name that has come up a couple of times that I wouldn't have necessarily had on my list, but I am now kind of being talked into having him on my team is not that this guy doesn't have a good reputation, but Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. A number of coaches brought up him to me. It's hard. There's a lot of good wing defenders. It's hard to sort of get through the list, but KCP is a guy who I wouldn't have had on my short list, and is now there because of coaches I've talked to. But that's another topic for another day.
I have a quick question for the panel, just on all defensive teams, because MacMahon should have a vote, and the rest of us, I believe, do have a vote. How are we going to handle the all defense team from the fact that it is a quote unquote positionless ballot this year? Because really, if you are going from 1 to 10, typically in terms of the most impactful defensive players, you're probably going to have that list be predominantly a list of big men. And I've always thought that I always liked how the all defense teams were set up, where you had 2 guards and 3 front court players, because really you should be building a team to guard people, not just have, in theory, 5 centers out there. So what do we think the general voting philosophy is? And for the 2 of you who have votes, how are you going to handle that?
I would have at least 5 bigs. I don't have a vote, but I'm going to put the 5 most impactful defensive players on the team. And I think, off the top of my head, it's Gobert, it's Wemby, Anthony Davis, Chet Holmgren, and Bam Adebayo. I think to leave, if you're a top 5 defensive player in the league, impact-wise, you should be on an all defensive.
Well, there are two teams, to be clear, but you would just do it. Rank your 10 best defensive players, whatever position, and do that.
I'm saying I would at least make sure. And again, I haven't really crunched the numbers, really studied this. I don't have a vote, so I don't necessarily have to. I'm just saying I would have the 5 most impactful players on the first team. And then if you feel like you need to get some wings and guards, fine. But the point of the positionless ballot is you're trying to reward at least the five most impactful defensive players, and then you can discuss the second team.
By the way, it's interesting you say that because Bam Adebayo, who I voted for Defensive Player of the Year 2 years ago, largely on the support of coaches who talked me into it. Bam has definitely come up from a few coaches, but I was texting with an Eastern Conference head coach last night, and we were talking about this exact thing, MacMahon, about choosing between the bigs. And we were going back and forth, and we basically got down to if you could choose between Jared Allen or Bam Adebayo, this coach, whose team will be in the playoffs, and it's not JB Bickerstaff, said,
what else did JB say?
He said, this coach said Jared Allen. So now I've got other coaches who say, no, Bam is, between the two of them, Bam is the guy.
Cavs corner.
I was waiting for it.
There you go.
Looking forward to that Jackson production on this.
Cavs with a huge win over the Jake LaRavia-led Memphis Grizzlies.
Little bit of a squeaker there for a while.
But how are you guys going to handle the all defensive ballots?
So my philosophy is going to be sort of to kind of not be married to necessarily it's got to be 2 guards, 2 forwards, a center, that sort of thing. But I am going to position adjust the defensive responsibility. So you get extra credit as Derek White and Jalen Suggs for what you're doing as perimeter defenders relative to a big man who's making the same impact, because the standard is much higher. The replacement level is way higher for those bigs, is kind of the way I'm thinking about it. But at the same time, it could be 5 big men out of 10 on my final team or whatever. So, I think on the Kentavious Caldwell-Pope point, that's an interesting one where one of the guys he's competing with now is his Denver teammate Aaron Gordon, who I would say, statistically has shown up as the more impactful defender this season. But for some reason, the buzz has coalesced behind KCP.
Well, true. I mean, they both are very versatile. I have not had anybody mention Gordon to me. Not that I've talked to every coach.
I've been thinking about voting for Gordon personally.
Yeah.
I had somebody ask me the same thing about KCP, and I said, I'm probably going to vote for Aaron Gordon if I'm going to vote for a Nugget.
Well, I will say this. A number of the coaches have said Drew Holiday and Derek White, you got to have them both on there.
Yeah.
Don't talk to me if you're not.
I would agree with that.
I would have Derek White. I would not. I don't think I'll have Drew Holiday on mine, which is
I think that
disrespect to Drew, but I would say that if I'm taking one of those guys, I'm taking Derek White.
I would agree with you, and that's probably where I'll end up. But, and Drew just signed a new 4-year, $130 million extension with the Celtics today, actually, is when the Celtics announced it.
A 4-year fully guaranteed deal.
Yes.
With the Celtics.
Took a pay cut, though, which is not a surprise. Took a pay cut in the first year of the deal from his player option, which will buy the Celtics a little bit of wiggle room. They're still going to be in the second apron, but they can probably re-sign Sam Hauser now and not be totally incapacitated. But
Jaden McDaniels,
well, he's still got a year left. He's got a.
I thought he was a free agent.
He has a team option for next year.
Jaden McDaniels or Anthony Edwards, is that a decision you're going to have to make?
I don't think either of them are probably going to be on mine. I never answered my own question. I'm probably going to end up having 3 or 4 guards on mine. I probably have 1 or 2 on the first team and 1 or 2 on the second team, sort of like I always have. Because I think to Kevin's point, you could just have 10 bigs and it wouldn't be wrong, probably in a lot of years. But like guys like Alex Caruso and Derek White, to me, when you look at the way they impact the game, like you're recognizing the abilities of guys across the spectrum,
right?
So the way they impact the game,
right? So this is where all defense gets really tough. So like Caruso is a guy that I've talked to coaches about, and same with Lou Dort. So you look at like Jalen Suggs, Lou Dort, Alex Caruso, Drew Holiday. Not that I have a total comprehensive list, but I just anecdotally, these are some of the conversations I've had. You may only really be able to put 2 of those guys on there, and, as I'm trying to break the tie, having discussions with people, Lou Dort, he's smaller than some of those other guys. So
not smaller, shorter.
That's true. He's shorter. And so, but he guards guys much taller than him. How do you calculate that? Alex Caruso steals per minute is wild. I mean, the guy just puts up big time defensive production numbers. You would probably say that Dort plays a bigger role for his team than Caruso plays for his, but Alex Caruso is a prototypical all defensive team player. These are the kind of struggles that you have. And because we don't have, in the media, we don't have the expertise in defense. That's why I go to the coaches. And by the way, they disagree a lot too.
Yeah.
It's not simple.
One note on Caruso, he still has to play one more game to qualify for this, because even though he's played, I believe, 69 games this season, too many of those fell under the 15-minute threshold, which is one of the continued ridiculous. Isaiah Hartenstein is going to be ineligible for all defensive because of this. I'm glad that the NBA has finally taken measures so that fans can ensure that they see Isaiah Hartenstein out there playing full games, and that we're not penalizing him for the fact that he happened to be a reserve for most of the season, even though he's played a lot more minutes than many guys who are starters who are qualified.
They used to send the ballots before the season ended, and now they have to wait until Sunday night to send them, because they can only send a ballot that has all of the players who are actually eligible, because they have to wait to figure out who is eligible.
I'm actually fine with that, because normally I'm getting pestered by the league. Send in your ballot, send in your ballot, send in your ballot.
Get it in.
Why isn't it here?
Mark Broussard from the league PR office kindly saying, can you please send a ballot in?
No,
I'm working on it, Mark
Broussard. Yeah, come on, man. He's very chipper every time we do a pool report. Hadn't been nearly as often since Cuban sold his majority share of the team. One guy who's absolutely an all defense caliber player, won't qualify, and even doesn't play enough minutes to justify it. Jonathan Isaac, who about maybe the most versatile in the league. And to get back to the Magic, the reason we're talking about the Magic is because they're the number 3 defense in the league. But they're not a good enough offensive team to do damage in the playoffs. They are 22nd in the league in offense, and every team below them is waiting for the lottery. Which, given where they are kind of in the rebuild, they're still a rebuilding team. There's a rebuilding team that's made massive progress this year and won much more than anticipated. But this is the reason why when you're talking about the Magic long term, one question you hear a lot of is, hey, are they going to do something to get a real shot creating type of guard in there? And then you have to understand, the guys they're relying on to create the vast majority of their offense. And Bontemps, you mentioned how much they missed Franz Wagner when he's been hurt, but he's still a young player on a rookie deal. And obviously Paolo Banchero is on his second deal. To have that kind of shot creating responsibility on young forwards, there's going to be challenges offensively. But again, even if it would seem disappointing just because they had a chance to be at home court advantage in the first round, even if they end up in the play-in and get bounced, this has still been a year of tremendous progress for the Magic.
I only mean that from an optical standpoint. I totally agree with you from the progress they've made. It's just funny. Earlier in the week when I started saying to people, even with the Sixers, hey, by the way, the team to watch is Orlando. If you want to have a chance to get out of the play-in, that's probably the best path for it to happen. People are like, what are you talking about? They're going to finish second or third. And because everybody's they've been up there for so long. They've had such a good year. And the way this week is broken, now all of a sudden they could end up 8th, which is just not what anybody would have guessed a week and a half ago.
Do you know the stat off the top of your head? When the Heat won some playoff series last year, they were the first team in many years to be a bottom 10 offensive team and win a playoff series. But typically, if you're a bottom 10 offensive team, you have to have some balance, even if you're great defensively. I don't know if you know that stat, but that's something the Magic are trying to do,
especially in today's NBA. And where
for sure.
You might be able to look it up before the pod is over. I don't know it off the top of my head.
It's not that important.
That's testing the machine's capabilities.
Real quick, just before I upset people, that was not a comprehensive list of people I'm considering for all defense. Off the top of my head, I've talked about Herb Jones with the Pelicans. I don't want to fire anybody up more than they're already going to be fired up.
Don't worry, Mavericks fans. He's considering Luka.
That consideration was taken and has been discarded. All right. Well, one of the teams that hasn't been in the bottom 10 in offense was the Indiana Pacers. When we were doing this during the in-season tournament, Pelton, the Pacers were playing at an absolute breakneck pace, putting up enormous numbers, routinely putting up over 130 points a game. Tyrese Halliburton was putting up crazy assist to turnover ratio where, he'd go through 3-4 games and be like, 55-3 or some crazy stuff like that. He has not quite been the same player since he had that awful leg injury where he basically did the splits. Where are you at with the Pacers now that you have a large sample size after they were really the darlings of the first couple of months of the season?
Yeah, I thought this was interesting to look at in part because our guy Bontemps has been highlighting that Halliburton hasn't been the same player. And, they have slipped from being the greatest offensive in NBA history, obviously with the improvement in offense being a big factor in that, all the way to the number 2 offense in NBA history.
Unacceptable.
The Boston Celtics have been so amazing. And even if you look at it since the All-Star break, or I think I looked at since January 30th, which is when Halliburton returned to the lineup. So a couple weeks before All-Star, they're number 2 over that span. Perhaps more interesting is that Boston is more than 6 points per 100 possessions ahead of them. Like there's the field and there's Boston way up here off the chart. And then the Lakers are 3rd in that span, which I thought was interesting. Breaking down like Halliburton individually, so a couple of things to note here. Number one, it's really not his style of play that has changed, even with the injury and the lingering issues from that. It's mostly just he isn't making threes. He was at 40% before the injuries, at 33% since he came back. And then number two, the reason that the offense has stayed so amazing is in large part because they're not dropping off very much when Halliburton is on the bench. Our guy TJ McConnell is having an amazing on-court season where they actually have a better offensive rating right now with McConnell on the court than Halliburton. And you put the two of those guys out there together, it's a limited sample. But according to Cleaning Glass, their offensive rating with those two guys is 132 in 440 possessions.
The other thing, obviously, is they made a major midseason adjustment, bringing in Pascal Siakam. And, a lot of times when you bring in a guy who's going to be a focal point offensively, it's not going to be smooth. And I think, like Siakam has benefited them much more defensively than offensively. Like you look at their most used lineup, and that's got, Siakam in there. The offensive rating is only 111.8. Now it's been great defensively, but Siakam they were playing so fast and they were, it was like the epitome of pace and space. And Siakam's a guy who likes to, he likes to bounce the ball a little bit. He likes, he's not a floor spacing type of guy. He's more of an ISO player. And so I do think that that trade, while I think that trade raises the ceiling for the Pacers this season and certainly the next few years, assuming he gets his deal and stays there. I do think it kind of gummed things up a little bit for them offensively this year.
Well, by the way, just to highlight Kevin's numbers. So before Halliburton came back for the first roughly half the season, Pacers had an offensive rating of 121-ish. He came back. They're now down to 118.8. Again, second best in the league. Still awesome. To Kevin's point, however, because we've just all sort of ignored the Celtics because they've been so far ahead of everybody. Before January 30th, they had an offensive rating of roughly 120. Since January 30th, they are 26-6 with an offensive rating of 125.1, a defensive rating of 110, a net rating of 14.9 over a 32-game sample.
And this is why we will talk about the Western Conference playoffs a lot more than the Eastern Conference playoffs.
That's exactly right. And if we're talking about the Eastern Conference playoffs, it's because the Celtics are doing their thing and making a mess of it. Like we said the other day, if there's a year when we should finally see the Celtics have the playoff run through the East that Brian has been waiting for while Brian is in the Western Conference, this is the year to do it.
I will say this. Obviously, we'll talk a lot about the playoffs over the next 2 months. But other than whoever Denver plays, in my view, there isn't going to be much difference between the favorites and the underdogs in any of these first round series. Maybe we'll see, we know that you're going to be covering the Mavericks and Clippers, MacMahon, and we'll see where the health of Kawhi Leonard is, and even James Harden. But like, assuming there's going to be variance due to health, and I don't care who makes it through the play-in. Any of those teams, I mean, whoever the Nuggets play, the Nuggets are going to be fairly favored. But like, and it's not necessary. It's not meant to be a slap at the Timberwolves or the Thunder. The difference in the talent level between the teams that are 8, 9, 10 and the teams that are 2, 3, 4, it's not really that much. The only real difference in those teams is what consistency they've had during the season.
Well, we should say, because we're contractually obligated to talk about the Lakers, Wednesday night, very bad for the Lakers, because with Denver winning, they are all but locked into the 1 seed. And unless we want to have a second bronze broom ready for the Lakers, if they can make it through the play-in, it's going to be very difficult for the Lakers to get out of the 9-10. And if they're able to win those 2 games, they're going to have a rested Nikola Jokic and Jamal Murray and Aaron Gordon waiting for them, which ain't going to end well.
The difference between 8 and 9 is massive. And like, I know if you're a 7-8, you get 2 shots to make the playoffs. But man, there's a lot of pressure on that 7-8 game in both conferences, because there like we saw last night, the drop off from Denver to Minnesota, and then you take into the championship experience into account. It's funny when you look at the teams who could be coming out of the play-in both conferences. You talk about not that big of a difference in talent, but there could be a huge difference in playoff experience, and it's flipped. It's the play-in teams that would have the massive experience advantage for whatever that's worth.
2 chances to get out of to make the playoffs, 1 chance to have a real playoff run.
There you go.
Yeah, the Lakers have lost. Let me see what they did at the last regular season meeting last year. The Lakers have lost, I believe,
9 in a row.
I think it's 9. Let me see here.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Maybe 10.
It's at least 8. It's at least 8. 4 this year and 4 in the playoffs.
No, it's at least 9.
They've lost every game to the Kings since your favorite retired ref hung them up. Hey, I love Dick.
Bavetta. That's Mr.
We're a Disney podcast, MacMahon. We're a Disney podcast.
Yeah, Dick Bavetta refed a lot of games on Disney Channel.
By the way, as I was looking at performance over recent runs, do you know who the best team on defense in the last 15 games is?
I do. It's over the last 18 games if you want to go to the 6-2 run.
I guess you can maybe go farther back. I looked at 15.
Is it the Luka-led Mavs?
It is the Luka-led
It
Mavs.
is.
And actually, you can pinpoint the Mavericks being the best defense in the NBA to exactly the night that Jason Kidd changed the starting lineup, and he we've talked about this a lot, Derrick Jones Jr. in for Josh Green, and then Daniel Gafford in for Derek Lively. And Gafford has been great, but Lively wasn't the problem. Getting their best on-ball defender in the starting lineup has been something that has really flipped this season. And we can go back further. Getting Kyrie Irving healthy has flipped the season. The Mavericks are 24-7 during this run of 31 straight games that he's played. So that's been huge, obviously. But again, coming out of the All-Star break, they lost 5 of 6 and were the worst defense in the league during that span. And that's when there was a lot of rumblings. Is Jason Kidd in trouble? I mean, there was media discussion in Dallas. There's rumblings around the league. He changed the starting lineup.
Well, they were awful defensively between the All-Star break and that lineup change.
Right.
I mean,
like I said, worst
5.
No, worse.
Was it worst? Okay.
Yeah, thanks for listening. I said that 47 seconds ago.
Sorry.
I mean, the other thing that was going on during that stretch, because I saw them play in Boston, which may have warped my view of the Mavericks for a period of time, and their defense specifically, given what we just talked about with the Celtics offense. Daniel Gafford was barely playing during that stretch.
That's right. We were really questioning their decision to trade a first-round pick for him at that time if they weren't even going to play him.
And listen, Pelton, Kyrie Irving brought up his trade grade.
Heard.
People blame me. I'm like, hold on, that was the machine. And then I
didn't know about that. What did he say?
I was going to say, I'm not aware of this.
He said he has it on his phone.
Yeah,
the
called it a
Instagram
meme.
post of the it's not really a meme, but
Yeah.
that's
But
neither here nor there.
And nobody mentioned that a year ago. But
Well,
listen,
what was the grade?
A deed.
yeah, and
Oh.
and I believe you deed up their moves at the deadline. And look, I'm not trying to throw you under the bus because I was right there saying, "Hey, I think the Mavs overpaid. I think the Mavericks really put themselves in trouble for their future." And
by the way, they very well may have still.
here's what I'm going to say. I'm willing to go ahead and take a mea culpa. I'm willing to. Is it mea culpa or mulligan, or are those the same things? Whatever. I'm willing
Mea
to say
culpa is like saying you're sorry. A mulligan is like a do-over.
all right, I'm not sorry. I'm not sorry.
Then don't give him a mea culpa.
But I was wrong. And here's why. Here's why I was wrong. They are absolutely
Sorry, not sorry.
Yeah. I'm not sorry. I was wrong. Every once in a while, I'm gonna be wrong. Because the whole risk was if it doesn't work out and Luka leaves, you are in deep trouble and you've mortgaged 4 years of draft capital when you'll need it the most. At this point, and a lot of things can change, but I'm just telling you, the way things are rolling, the way it's clicking with Kyrie, the way they've surrounded them with pieces that are really fitting well, and Gafford's 25, has time left on his contract. PJ Washington's 25, has time left on his contract. Dante Exum's going to be back next year, like pieces that can be here for a little bit. Luka won't sign the extension this summer, but that's only because wait a year and then the value of the potential extension soars. At this point, I would be very surprised if he doesn't sign an extension with the Mavericks next summer. He is happy and they are rolling, and I did not see this coming, but they absolutely profile as a legitimate contender. And in a lot of ways, what they are is a supercharged version of the team that went to the Western Conference Finals a couple years ago. And that team didn't start out well. And a big reason they didn't start out well is Luka wasn't in good shape to start the season. They shut him down for a few weeks, ankle conditioning, COVID. So you slice that season pre-January 1st to January 1st. But Kyrie Irving is a supercharged version of that Jalen Brunson. And I'm not trying to have a Kyrie versus Jalen today discussion, but you're talking about legit, really good second options. In Kyrie's case, a legit, no doubt co-star that are like 50, 40, 90 efficiency and are very comfortable and good playing off of Luka. And then that Mavericks team finished the year on a 23-7 run. Like I said, the Mavericks since Kyrie had been back are 24-7. And they did it with Luka, a number two, and a bunch of guys who just fit. These Mavericks, the same type thing, except they've got Lively's been out. They're hoping he's back for the first round. They've got the biggest question mark for that team a couple of years ago was, what are you doing at center? They've got two big-time lob threat rim protectors that Luka's been wanting. And like I said, it's a supercharged version of a team that went to the Western Conference Finals a couple of years ago.
JP,
Okay,
do you
Pelton,
think they're a contender?
Yeah, what do you think? What do you think with this sample size?
Well, the one thing we should note here is we mentioned the Lakers is a team that were unhappy with the result of that Nuggets Timberwolves game. Dallas, because they're locked into the 4-5 in that one side of the bracket, also was surely cheering for Minnesota on Wednesday night and hoping they would win, because that kind of determines, the bracket may not fall as well for them as it did in 21 when they were able to make that run.
Well, also real quick, it exposed the one flaw in Luka's Pravi MVP, as they call it, which means real MVP in Slovenian. The one flaw in his MVP campaign, and that's Joker is freaking really awesome.
No shame finishing second to that guy.
No, a 41-11-7 on 80% shooting against the soon-to-be four-time Defensive Player of the Year on ESPN kind of reinforced it's tough to knock that guy off the throne right now. But anyways.
Yeah, so, I think one of the mistakes I made at the trade deadline was I focused so much talking about the risk the Mavericks were taking long-term with these deals. And, I think the response from Dallas, the front office, would have been, well, it's a risk to not do anything because then Luka might leave. So my real criticism was not that I thought they were taking on risk. It was that I didn't think they were getting better enough now to take on that risk. Whereas, when Milwaukee traded a bunch of picks for Drew Holiday a few years ago, it was like, well, that's an acceptable risk because now I think you're the favorites to win the title. And I don't think Dallas is that good, but unquestionably, one of the things that's happened is PJ Washington has been a way better defender than he ever was in Charlotte, where there was a really unserious defensive culture for a lot of the period of time that he was there. And I give the Mavericks credit for projecting how he might fit in there. And then obviously Gafford has played this larger than expected role because of Lively's injuries. And, it's provided more benefit having, when they have had the two of those guys, 48 minutes of lob threats. The kind of, counter argument to this from the Mavericks perspective is that 2021 example aside, how you play after the trade deadline doesn't usually, or after the All-Star break in this case, doesn't usually tell us as much about how you're going to do in the playoffs as the first half of the season, which will be an interesting contrast.
Why is that?
I mean, partially because of the fact that it's just a longer period of time, partially because, we see teams start tanking or they get locked into their playoff seeds and aren't really that concerned, which isn't as big of a factor this year. I don't think the Mavericks are like feasting on a weak schedule, but it's an interesting contrast with in this first round matchup against the Clippers, who were by far the better team in the first half of the season, haven't been nearly as good in the second half of the season. And, particularly if Kawhi Leonard is able to come back, which we still don't know, like it's going to be a fascinating test of, peaking at the right time versus performance over the whole season.
All I'll say on this is to Tim, and Tim, I'm sure will make fun of me, or will bring up his common use for what he calls me. The Mavericks have been awesome for the past month. No question about it. They look really good. If they lose in 5 or 6 games to the Clippers in the first round, all the talk about how great they played for the last 6 weeks is going to go away. So while I think they look really good, like we've been saying really since the trade deadline, these trades were made for this team to be able to be a team that can make a run like that team did a couple of years ago. And if they are really competitive in the second round with the Nuggets and even lose in 6 or 7 games, it's a really good series. Okay, that's a sign that this team has taken real steps forward. If they lose in the first round again, it's going to be like, all right, well, what did they really get out of these trades? Even if they had a good 6 weeks, if they lose in the first round, and it's like, all right, have they really actually progressed, or are they still a bottom half of the West team?
Well, they would have progressed from tanking the last couple games last season. Make sure they kept the number 10 pick, which they ended up flipping into Lively and kind of extending that deal into part of the Gafford deal. But anyways, no, look, you're absolutely right. I do think they're going to beat the Clippers. Again, I've been wrong before.
How do we know? How do we know who the Clippers are going to be? I don't know.
I think they're going to beat the Clippers regardless, to be honest with you.
Wow, MacMahon is going for people in Dallas to be happy with him now.
Tell positive stories.
It won't matter.
Positive spin.
No, it won't matter. Listen. You know how I roll. I say what I think, and if I'm wrong, I admit it.
I'm obviously just giving you a hard time.
But
your bona fides on these are not to be questioned. We know you're a straight shooter.
But just like I said,
are to be questioned.
And listen, they ain't gonna like me anyway, so the hell with that.
Well, that's certainly true.
Plus, I said I'd vote Joker for MVP still, so that ruins anything. But whatever. But just like I said, 21-22, you can cut the season into 2 very distinct parts. Luka not right / out to Luka back, right? This same thing. Kyrie out most of the first half to Kyrie's back. And again, I told you 24-7 since he's been back, and he's played those 31 straight games. I'd be surprised if he doesn't hit one or both of these last 2. Same with Luka. But when they have Kyrie in the lineup, they're 39-19 this year. When they don't, they're 11-11. He got $1 million bonus for 50 wins, and he absolutely earned it. And honestly, and here's something that I absolutely did not expect to happen. The same way, or in a similar way, I should say, not the same, but Jalen Brunson was a real leader for the Mavericks. He was a huge part of the culture. Losing him screwed their locker room as much as it screwed things on the court. Kyrie plays that same kind of calming influence, which I know there's been chaos in his career, but on this Mavericks team, he has that same kind of calming influence that I think is critical to have, because Luka is going to run hot sometimes. And like, the one thing about Kyrie, if you watch him play basketball, maybe he'll smile, but like, he's not an emotional guy. He doesn't spend time bickering with referees or snapping at teammates or whatever the case may be. And people talk about how Luka's leadership's improved. I think Kyrie is clearly emerged as kind of the vocal and emotional leader of that team.
This is some stunning stuff from MacMahon.
Well, you got on me last year when I said it wasn't all Kyrie's fault, or really any of Kyrie's fault other than health, that they stunk it up after the trade. And again, I can only evaluate what I've seen unfold.
Listen, he's an exemplary citizen in Dallas, as you have said, exemplary.
I mean, he has been.
Well, look, to go back to the Clipper Mavs thing real quick, this is just another example of what's at stake across the board in the league in these playoffs, where you've got the Clippers and Mavericks playing in the first round. Those are two teams that at different parts of the year, Dallas right now, the Clippers 2 months ago, look like teams that could be a finals contender. They're playing in the first round. One of them's going to lose. And you look across the board at both conferences, there's going to be a lot of teams that are really disappointed by the end of April. And we're just talking the next 2.5 weeks, not over the next 2.5 months.
Yeah, and especially in the West.
There's a lot especially in the West, but even in the East. I mean, there's a lot at stake across the board. And there's going to be, I think, a whole ton of stuff going on this summer as a result of what happens over the next 2.5 months, because there's going to be a lot of disappointed teams. When there's a lot of disappointed teams, that tends to mean a lot of change.
I was going to say, especially in the West, you've got a bunch of teams aside from Oklahoma City that have pushed a ton of chips into the middle of the table. I mean, we talked about the win now moves that the Mavericks had made. Like, obviously the Clippers, going back to the Kawhi, or I call it Kawhi, the PG/Kawhi trade, again with Harden this year, the Lakers, even the Nuggets, the Wolves with Gobert, like the Suns. I mean, my goodness, all these teams have pushed so many chips into the middle of the table, and half of them are going to be in Cabo in May.
And then in the East, if Philly ends up in the 7th seed, which seems very realistic, then you could have 2 of the 3 teams that came into the season with the highest expectations in the East playing each other in the first round too.
No question.
Pelton, evaluating the Clippers, we've been talking about this Mavs-Clippers series. There's a lot going on there, especially with Harden and Paul George headed potentially towards unrestricted free agency. Paul George has an option, but I think it's unlikely he picks it up. Harden is unrestricted free agent.
What's Ty Lue's contract situation?
He's got one left. So in a market where people who are championship coaches are getting 8 figures a year, what does your sample size tell you about the Clippers, who have been one team for half the year and another team for half the year?
Exactly. Yeah, that was what I was going to say. This is a large sample size theater pod, but it still feels like we're talking about all these small sample sizes with the Clippers. And, we talked when they were in that first 10 game stretch where Russell Westbrook was still starting and, Harden looked, like he was still playing his way into shape. And it was like, oh boy, are they going to be in the play-in? And one thing they have done is they've all but assured themselves home court advantage through at least one round of the playoffs, which, Miami last year aside, historically has kind of been necessary to get to the finals, although their path does take them through Denver. And, the other question is they've got this stretch where they were awesome in the month of January, end of December, January. And then they've had this stretch since the All-Star break, whereas you guys have talked about on the pod recently, they've been mediocre. And a lot of the difference really comes down to 3-point shooting. They went into the break with the league's number 1 3-point percentage. They were out shooting teams by about 4% in terms of their 3-point percentage. They were at 39.5. Opponents were about at 36. Since the All-Star break, opponents are up to 38.5. The Clippers are down to 36.5, and they're getting outshot by 2% per game from 3-point range. And this is one of those cases where I think Kawhi Leonard health aside, like this, the larger sample is probably more telling than that post All-Star break sample specifically. They're probably going to shoot better and opponents probably aren't going to shoot as well. But MacMahon is raising his hand.
How much do you think that has to do with James Harden's best 3-point defense over the last couple months being on his own teammate?
Yeah.
I mean, that's fair. Teams generally don't have much control over how well opponents shoot from three against them. That's kind of one of the consistent small sample size, takeaways when we're doing that podcast, is a way to look at what's fluky and what's not. So I'm not too worried about it from that standpoint. Even the full season 3-point percentage doesn't carry over that well for opponents to the playoffs. 3-point shooting from your opponents is more something that happens to you than something that you do as a team, is I guess how I would put it. But the other thing I
see Terrence Mann in the semifinals against the Jazz to basically ruin that chapter in Jazz history.
Yeah, we can go to the Clippers specifically for that. But the other thing I wanted to look at was, let's say that Kawhi is not able to go. How good are these guys? They just had a great win, in Phoenix without a couple of their players. With Harden and PG on and Kawhi off, they're still +8 net rating, according to Cleaning the Glass. They're plus almost 11 when they have Kawhi with those two guys. So I think this is a case where I wouldn't pick them if I didn't think Kawhi Leonard would be able to play again in the series against Dallas. But I don't think, because of the addition of Harden, if he's playing, more like the last couple of weeks than the month or two before that, that's where he does give them a chance to potentially win a playoff series without Kawhi, unlike that team 2 years ago that lost in the play-in.
All right. Before we go, large sample size theater. The Boston Celtics have a net rating of 11.7. That means per 100 possessions, they outscore their opposition by 11.7 points. That is the third highest all time. The only two that are higher are the 95-96 Bulls and the 96-97 Bulls. It's a tenth of a point, so it could obviously move. It's a tenth of a point higher than the 2016-17 Warriors, which I submit are one of the greatest teams of all time. That was Durant's first year there. And it's ahead of the 2007-8 Celtics, which were, dominant front to back of that season. Those are the other teams sort of in the top 5 or 6. The 70-71 Bucks, with Oscar Robertson and Lou Alcindor. I'm not sure if he had become Kareem Abdul-Jabbar yet, but the 71-72 Lakers were at like 10.2. I think that was a 35, whatever their win streak was. So historically great domination by the, by the Celtics. By the way, the team in second in net rating is the Thunder and the Timberwolves. Both have are at 6.6. So it's as much of a difference between 1 and 2 as it is between about 2 and roughly 18-19 in terms of the spread on how dominant that the Celtics have been. So, Pelton, is this an all-time great team? By the way, Jackson tells us Lou Alcindor became Kareem Abdul-Jabbar in the fall of 71, so he was still Lou Alcindor in 70-71. Are the Celtics an all-time great team? Their rating says that they are, Pelton.
Yeah, so I think one of the things we've seen is that historically net rating during the regular season was an overwhelming predictor of success in the playoffs. So almost all of these teams at the top of the list through the 2014-15 Warriors won the championship. The only one that didn't was there was one year, I think, where Milwaukee and the Lakers might have both been in the top 10 all time in the same year.
That was the year the Lakers had set the record for wins, right? When they were the two best teams in the league by a heavy amount.
So, yeah. And then if we look over the last, 6 to 7 years, it's not necessarily been as predictive. So San Antonio had an all-time season in 2015-16 when the Warriors went 73-9, lost to Oklahoma City. The Warriors, we know about all the other factors. I don't know if we want to get a Cavs corner again here, but obviously they did not win the NBA Finals when they went 73-9. And we've seen, teams not quite at that level in recent years not pay it off with the championship. So obviously they have to do that. I do think there's a chance that we look back at the end of the season and say, well, this was glaringly obvious all along. The Celtics were the enormous favorites. Why did we, doubt them so much? And it was strictly because of their recent history. This I thought was an interesting piece of trivia, though. So when I was looking at the Mavericks, I looked at the teams that improved the most from before the All-Star break to after the All-Star break in terms of their net rating. Denver is actually number 1 on this list because they've just been kind of rolling through people since the All-Star break. San Antonio is number 2, which is interesting in its own right. Dallas is 3. And then Boston, which was already a +10 net rating before the All-Star break, is the 4th most improved team in the NBA since the All-Star break. So that's pretty wild.
That's scary.
Since the All-Star break. Holy Moses. I
mean, they've been incredible. And look, it goes back to the same thing we've talked about a lot. Last year, Denver at the start of March wrapped up the Western Conference. They scuffled for a month, and we all went into the playoffs saying, all right, what's Denver going to do? Are they going to finally prove everybody wrong that Jokic can 100% be a guy to lead you all the way to the finish line, or are they going to stumble and fall short again? What did they do? They go 16-5, whatever they did in the playoffs. They march their way through, and they win the title. And if Boston goes through the playoffs this year, wins a championship in June, they'll go down as an all-time great team because they have the resume of an all-time great team. Mm-hmm. And if they lose, whether it's in the finals to Denver, whether it's before that to Milwaukee or Philly or the Knicks or whoever.
Especially if it's before that.
Right. But regardless, whenever they lose in the playoffs, if they don't win a title, they're not going to be seen as an all-time great team. They're going to be seen as, yet again, the Celtics, whenever they do lose, aren't able to get over the top. Because this team has done everything else. They've made the finals. They've had a ton of playoff success. They've played more playoff games over a 7-year stretch than any team in the history of the league without winning a championship, playing that many games. They've gone deep in the playoffs over and over and over again. It's the only thing they have left to do. And so that's why we keep saying, until they win a championship, it's going to be a failure year after year. And the only thing you can point to is, yes, they struggle in clutch situations historically. That's really the only Achilles heel you can really point to with this group and say, we're not sure if they're good enough there, because across the board, otherwise, whether it's defensive versatility, whether it's shooting, or go down the list, they check all the boxes for the modern league that you would want in a team. Other than they haven't gotten all the way to the end.
Celtics net rating since the All-Star break, I just looked it up. We just said 11.7 is 3rd all time behind 2 Jordan-led Bulls championship teams. In the 24 games since the All-Star break, 15.1 net rating.
Yes, we did this actually earlier in the pod. We did almost this exact same stat.
It was very similar, but I also looked at, I have it back the entire play-by-play era, which is back to 96, 97. There's no team that either before or after the All-Star break has a stretch this good in one of those 2 splits.
And by the way, as much as we talk about the Celtics struggles closing games, clutch net rating, you know where they rank?
I'm going to guess first just because of the way you're asking that, but I'm sure it's high either way.
Pelton?
Higher, I would say like 4th. It's higher than last time.
Pelton hit it on the money. Of course, the machine got it on the money.
Nailed it.
15.4. Do we want to guess the teams above them?
Probably the Nuggets.
Nuggets are number 1.
Thunder?
Yeah.
Thunder are, I'd have to scroll a little bit, number 10.
Not 3. Clutch teams. Milwaukee?
Dallas?
Dallas is 3. Milwaukee's 5. And then the number 2 team, fellas, we're going to get a good look at them during the week next week. For at least one
Lakers?
game. Not the Lakers.
It's not the Warriors. The Chicago Bulls?
Boom!
Oh, yeah. Clutch. I just got my email from the Bulls. Clutch player of the year, DeMar DeRozan.
Again, that he would absolutely get my vote.
Oh, he's getting my vote. He's gonna win the award, I think. He's been great.
And by the way, the Mavericks and Nuggets being 1 and 3 on that list, again, it's like I think the Mavericks are absolutely capable of making a deep playoff run with one glaring problem. That's the freaking Denver Nuggets probably going to be sitting there in the second round for them. Just like, again, I think Luka's absolutely a deserving MVP candidate, except for the fact that Joker's more deserving.
Yeah. Well, the Bontemps poll told us that Joker's going to win it in a landslide. So,
and he should.
Yeah.
He should. Luka will win MVP, just not this year.
Well, Luka could still win Finals MVP this year. Let him know.
Well,
let him know.
I'll be sure next time he wants to chit chat to let him know that.
I'm sure he'll be looking forward to it in Slovenian.
He got mad at me last time we chatted because I was asking about him and Ime talking, or he was barking at Ime. That's when I asked Ime about it, what was going on there. And Ime said, I don't understand Slovenian, so I don't know. And then I asked Luka about it, and Luka accused me of trying to get him fined. Okay.
You can get fined for what you say to another coach? Okay.
Well, there's a long list of players that Ime talks smack with.
Yes.
So Luka's just one
including
of them.
on his own team.
And there's a long list of coaches
yes.
that Luka talks smack to, and Ime's only one of them. So
Listen,
that is also true.
All-time record last year during the FIBA World Cup, where Luka was talking smack to the Secretary General of FIBA during the game in Spanish. That was a special moment. A very special moment. He was ejected several minutes later.
The only thing Luka's more elite at than his play is his complaining.
Hey! Since I'm being rah Mavs man, give me the little Mavs man uniform here. I will point out that Luka officially has not had a technical foul since February 27th. Had a couple rescinded since then, but officially.
How many? Has he only had 2?
Yeah, they've both been rescinded.
Well, I was saying when you said a couple, I was just curious if it was actually 2 or if it was more than that.
Well, he's had 3 rescinded this year, as we talked about last time, but 2 since his last official technical on February.
Hey, we're gonna have a new nickname for him, Bontemps. We're gonna call him the RSWB, the rose scented warm blanket. That's right, baby.
Hey, I'm just trying to get invited to Luka's 26th birthday party. Apparently 25 was a hell of a good time. He was telling us about the Serbian singers and all his, I missed out on that one.
I wouldn't hold my breath under the blanket there. All right. Thank you, Pelton, for enlightening us. Thank you, Jackson, for I didn't even hear what he said. Thank you, Jackson, for putting this together. Thank you to MacMahon and Bontemps. And thank you for listening and watching the Hoop Collective. We'll talk to you next week.
Adios, amigos.